being totally honest, I didn't even know the word toile for many years after I started creating my own clothes. And I started creating my own clothes when I was a teenager. So for many years, I didn't create toiles. And when I then stumbled upon the word and the idea, I felt like I should make them. So I did start making the odd toile here and there. However, they felt like an utter waste of time because I didn't really know why I was creating them. I mean, I kind of knew the vague idea, but I didn't know how to get the most out of them. I didn't know how to speed up the process of them. So it just felt a little bit of a waste of time. So what I'm going to do with you today is I'm going to share with you, firstly, what exactly toiles are. Then I'm going to share with you how to get the most out of them. So what they are useful for, what they are necessary for, and why they are a productive, yes, productive use of your time. I'm also going to share with you lots of tips and tricks so you can cut corners, you can make sure you're testing the right things, and you can make sure you're not wasting time testing the things that you don't need to test with them as well. So first of all, let's just get clear on what exactly toiles are. So toiles are prototypes, they're tests, they're samples of your final garments or parts of a garment. You don't always have to do the whole garment. You can literally do parts of a garment like I did here. I created a toile of a hood. So you don't always have to do the whole thing, and we're going to get on to when you want to do the whole and when you want to just do a piece of it later on. So what are you looking for when you're testing a toile? Why are you creating toiles? So there's three reasons. One is to test the fit, and that is probably the most common reason why people go ahead and create a toile. The second reason is to test the design of your garment, and this is especially important when you're designing your own sewing patterns because you don't have a final image and someone else who's created a toile of that garment to test it. So it's especially important when you draft your own patterns like I do. And the third reason is to test the sewing order and the sewing process. So this is really, really helpful if you are fairly new to sewing or new to the concept, the process you're sewing in that piece, or if you draft your own sewing patterns, because when you draft your own sewing patterns, you don't have the luxury of a fancy instruction book. You are creating your own instructions. So by creating a toile, you then have the chance to go through the sewing order and realize, oh, I should have sewn that before that because then that will look neater. And then you can do it in the correct order when you come to create the final piece. So what kind of fabrics do you want to use when it comes to toiles? So when it comes to toiles, you want to be choosing a fabric that behaves in the most similar way, if not the same way, as the final garment. So for example, these jeans I'm wearing here, I created a toile of them first in a thick-ish calico, so it behaves in a fairly similar way to the final piece. So you really want to be choosing a weight of fabric and a type of fabric that is behaving in the most similar way, if not the same way possible, as the garment you are creating. So that means if you're creating a floaty, silky, bias cut dress, I wouldn't want to use a stiff calico like this because it's really not going to represent the final piece. So then how can you really test the fit or the design properly, or even the sewing properly, with a fabric that behaves in a completely different way? So even if you are going for calico most of the time, choose weights of calico that are different. So have a thin calico, have a thicker calico for coats and jackets and wools and jeans, and have a thinner calico for those lighter weight garments. And if possible, if you are creating those silky kind of garments, choose a fabric, or go in your stash and choose a fabric that's just been sat there for years, that's never going to see the light of day. Go and use that if that is a cheap version or a version that you'd get rid of that final fabric. So you really want to be choosing something. The key to this is choose something that behaves in the same way or as similar way as possible to the final piece. And normally it is a cheaper fabric. Sometimes it's not, sometimes it's the same fabric because that's the only choice you have, or that is the fact that your final piece is actually made in a cheap fabric too, which is amazing. Just toile it in the same fabric. And what you might find is your garment, your toile, works out so well, you have a bonus garment as well. I find that happens all the time, and I end up with all these bonus extra garments, which is pretty cool, right? So then you're like, this was worth the time. I've got one garment in this fabric and one garment in this fabric, and you get 2 garments for the price of 1. So when it comes to stretch, the principles are the same. You want to be choosing fabrics that behave in the same way possible. So if I was creating this top, for example, I wouldn't want to then go and use a thick, heavy calico or any woven fabric, because it's not going to behave in the same way. There's no stretch to this. So I want to make sure when I am sewing any stretch garments, you are choosing a stretch fabric that has the same percentage of stretch to it. And I have another tutorial on this that you can check out that tells you how to test the stretch percentage. Because if you're choosing a fabric that has a different stretch percentage, you're going to find the fit is different, the design is different, and the sewing process feels slightly different too. So make sure when you are toiling stretch garments, the stretch percentage is the key thing here. Now let's just take this one step further to really clarify when you're going to be using the exact same fabric as your final piece. And one of those instances is swimwear, something I am obsessed with creating. And this is something I teach in depth inside my course, Take the Plunge. So we go over the sewing, fitting, toiling, drafting process, designing process inside this whole course. But when it comes to toiles, what I'm showing my students is that you have to test your swimwear with swimsuit fabric. Now you might find the swimsuit fabric you are using is cheaper than the final fabric, but what I tend to find is because I'm normally just using a plain color or a rib fabric, a rib swimsuit fabric, then actually I can't really get a fabric cheaper, and I have to just use the same fabric I would use as the final fabric. And actually what I found is because I teach about fitting first, and because I make sure all my students and I myself have a swimwear block that fits my size and shape, then the toiles I'm creating, they end up being the final piece. But the whole point of creating the toile is to have in mind that if it doesn't work, you're more than happy to create another toile, or you're more than happy to do the adjustments and to make it look a little bit messy and then go ahead and create the final piece. But if you find your toile turns into your final piece, amazing. I find that happens all the time when I'm creating my swimwear, which is very, very satisfying, I must say. Now let's dive into my pieces of advice, tips, tricks, and ways to cut corners when it comes to creating your own toiles. And I think I have 12 points, but it might turn into more because I always have more tips and tricks up my sleeve for these kind of things. Okay, tip number 1. I think it's really important we first of all get clear on when you do not need to make a toile. So you don't need to make a toile when you know you have created, not bought, but created that piece before. So when you've created it before and you're happy with the design, the fit, and the sewing process. So if you are doubting any of those things, whether you have created that garment before or whether you've never created that garment before and it's a new sewing pattern you've bought or a new sewing pattern you've created, then you want to be making a toile. And this leads me now on to point number 2, which is you don't always have to make the whole of the piece. So say for example, the hood I showed you at the beginning, I just wanted to test the pattern and test the design of this hood. So I literally just created the hood section. Or say for example, on this pair of trousers, I just wanted to test the shaping of the pocket. So I just did one pocket. I didn't do it both sides, even though on my final pair, I have a pocket both sides. So you don't need to create all of the garment. You can create part of it, and it's really about getting clear on why you are creating that toile. Are you creating that toile to test the fit? Are you creating it to test the sewing process, or are you creating it to test the design process, or is it a mixture of all 3 of these things? So say for example, you've never sewn a placket pocket before. What you want to be doing, if you have created a garment before and actually all you're doing is adding a placket pocket and you're happy with everything else, you're happy with the overall silhouette, you're happy with the sewing process of everything else, you're happy with the fit of it, then you could literally just create a toile of that placket pocket area to test the design and test the sewing process of it as well. So decide what you are testing and what you don't need to test, which brings me on to my third point. When it comes to design features, so what I mean by design features are your collars, are your pockets, are your style lines that aren't changing the shape of your garment or anything, that can be drawn onto a garment. You don't need to test these with your toile. So if, for example, I was doing placket pockets, I would just draw on this here because I'm happy with the sewing process, and all I want to do is test the location of it and test how wide is it going to be, so the design of it. I'm not testing the fit because that doesn't really matter for this, and that is all I would be doing. I'd just be drawing it on. So if you can draw on design elements and you don't need to test the sewing process, then just draw them on. If you feel like you want to build your confidence in the sewing process and the sewing order, then sew them in. So say, for example, if I had a style line here or like a wiggly line here, if I wanted to test whether I could sew that curve, because the more curved it is, the harder it is to sew, then I would go ahead and test it. But if actually I've just got a straight line here and I'm happy sewing it, or I've got a very gentle wave and I'm like, yep, I know I can sew that confidently, I'm not going to bother with it. So you can see there's times where you actually don't need to test everything. You can just draw it onto your toile when you're testing the design of things. My fourth tip is to test one half and then test the other half. So I even do this when I'm creating toiles of trousers. I will create one leg and cut out only one leg. I will put it on, and then if there's anything extremely wrong, I haven't made the other half and wasted loads of fabric and loads of time on it. And the same with when I'm doing, for example, this toile for a jacket. What I have done is I've tested one sleeve, and then I decided actually I wanted to drop the underarm a little bit. So then I've gone ahead and created the pattern for the other sleeve, and I've just cut out a little bit of the fabric of the bodice, and I've done a different sleeve. So actually these two sleeves are different. So test one half first, decide if you like it, and then test the other half afterwards. Obviously this isn't possible with all toiles, but wherever it is possible, I really recommend doing one and then the other. And also sometimes you don't need to do both sides. So if, for example, my sleeve was good on the first side I did, I could have just left it at that point if I was happy and felt confident in the fit, in the design, in the sewing process, in the balance of the overall garment. I could have just stopped there and decided, okay, I've tested the sleeve, I don't need to sew another sleeve. So where possible, don't sew things just for the sake of it. Sew them if they have a fitting, design, or sewing test need. When I was making this pair of trousers, I was really testing out the volume of the overall silhouette. So that meant I didn't quite know how much fabric I wanted here. So when I was trialing this, I actually left a lot of fabric on this seam here. So when you are either checking the fit with your toiles or you're checking extra volume with your toiles, I recommend adding extra seam allowance to allow for that. So when I am sewing up my normal garments, generally what I'm doing is a 1 centimeter seam allowance. If I'm doing a fit toile, I will always do a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. And if I'm doing something like this, where I'm testing whether I want to add more volume, I tend to add a bit more. Now, when it comes to really lightweight clothing, adding that extra seam allowance is going to add weight to it. So you just want to find that fine balance of adding that extra, but also not adding so much weight that it actually doesn't let you test the toile properly. Tip number 6 is to try on your toile, not just for 2 minutes, not just when you're looking in the mirror, I have a mirror here, but when you are doing normal everyday things, because you're not just going to be looking in the mirror all day every day when you're wearing your clothes, or maybe you are, but I don't think you are. So go and do normal things. Go and do the washing up, go and brush your teeth, go and read a book, go and work on your laptop. Just go and do normal things for 30 minutes. Is your toile still feeling comfy at the end of it? Is the design annoying you at the end of it? Do you need to change something? This is going to really tell you whether your piece of clothing really fits the idea you have in mind and also the comfort you desire as well. Now, obviously you do need to take into account that if you are using a fabric that's not as comfy as the final fabric, like for example these trousers, this calico is not anywhere near as comfy as this jeans fabric that's going to soften over time as well. So I'm gonna bear that in mind when I'm sitting in these jeans, testing them out as I'm writing on my laptop or as I'm walking around the villa tidying up things. So I can use my discernment at that point. But you really want to be wearing your toiles to do normal things in them. Sit down, stand up, walk up the stairs, especially when you're wearing trousers and those bottom halves. If you can't move in those garments well and they're not comfy, that is a reflection of what the final garment's going to be like. And this is where the toiles come in handy to test these things. We want to be able to move properly in them. We want to be able to feel good doing what we're going to do in that toile. Now, one thing I would say is obviously when it comes to like a wedding dress or an occasional wear item, then you're not going to desire the same comfort you would a normal garment necessarily. Now, I would. So my wedding dress, I wanted it to be as comfy as a normal piece of clothing because I always crave comfort. That's just what I always crave. But if you're like, actually, I don't mind for one day being uncomfy, then you can also use your discernment when it comes to the piece of clothing you're wearing as well. Now, continuing on the theme of occasional wear, when you are creating something like a wedding dress, something that's very fitted to the body, you want to make sure you're testing the fit of your toile so that the garment is the right way round. And what you might find is you have one side of your body slightly different to the other. This is very, very normal. Normally we have one shoulder higher than the other, so actually one strap is maybe going to be very slightly longer than the other strap. You might find other little tiny tweaks are needed to make sure the garment works for your different sides of your body, and that is very, very normal. So if you have something very close fitting, you want to make sure you're trying on your toile the right way round, which is actually the opposite of what I normally recommend. So what I normally recommend is to try on your toiles so they're inside out. That means you can then get to the seams, you can pin them really easily, you can mark things on the wrong side really easily, and you can really get to the stitch lines very, very easily. So that's my normal recommendation, but only when you're not doing something that's very, very close fitting. So normally I am trying on my toiles inside out, whether it's be my trouser toiles, my jacket toiles. You can see this toile here is already inside out for me to try on. And that just means I can get to everything really easily and see those seam lines very, very easily as well. Obviously, when you're getting to the point where you're looking at pockets and things like that, then you want to try things on the right way around. But when you're looking at the overall silhouette, actually trying on your toile inside out is going to help you see it better and make those tweaks a lot easier as well. So seeing as we have just touched on this toile here, let's go on to my next tip, which is if you draft your own patterns, make toiles of your blocks. So if you're new to drafting, your blocks are your templates for your sewing patterns. So for example here, I have my back and front bodice blocks. These are actually for when I was postpartum after having my son, so I have a larger bust size here. And what I did was I made a toile of these blocks. This is what I do with all my blocks, my trouser blocks, my skirt blocks, my bodice blocks. Because then what it means is I can then design using my toile of my blocks. I can put this on, I can literally draw on the silhouette of the garment I want. So say for example, if I was doing a strap top, I could draw on where I want this and it would be on me, and I can just test it directly on me, which means I'm not going to be playing a guessing game. Things are more likely to work out, and I'm more likely to only need one toile and then go on to my final piece by doing this method. So use your toile, draw on it, and use it in the design process if you draft your own patterns. Make those toiles of those blocks. Well worth the time. I promise you, it'll save you time in the long run. Also, a quick side note, if you want to create blocks that fit your size and shape perfectly, so you draft your own patterns, or you want to draft your own patterns and you want to know that they pretty much fit to perfection first time, maybe have the odd tweak when you're doing different design ideas, then this is something I teach in depth inside my program, Fitting Confidence. We go over all the adjustments so that you come away really confident in adjusting your blocks, your toiles, and your clothes to your size and shape. And the byproduct of the whole process is that you end up creating your own custom blocks, just like these, that are fitted to your unique size and shape. So you'll end up with unique trouser blocks, skirt blocks, and bodice blocks that can then be combined together to create your dresses, your jumpsuits, all other pieces of clothing basically. And a follow-up tip for having your garments inside out is to use safety pins when you're pinning in any adjustments. That means you're less likely to get pricked as you're taking your garment off, and also the pins are more likely to stay in when you're taking that garment off. So a pack of safety pins is really, really helpful. It means you're not pinning something in, taking it off, getting spiked in the process, and then it just coming undone at the same time, and your hard work and your time has just been wasted. Now, tip number 8, I think we're on number 8, it doesn't matter anyway. Tip number 8 is to get the most out of your toiles by using them like a notebook. That's how I like to think of my toiles. So for example, I might have a toile of a jacket like this, and then I might be thinking, okay, I want to draw on where I'd have a pocket. I maybe want to draw on what the print of the garment is, of the fabric is. So I'm just gonna quickly illustrate that on. Maybe I trace through a window like this and I just draw on the print of it to see whether that matches up, because I know that I'm going to create this in a fabric that has a print on it. And maybe I think, oh, actually I want to draw a collar that's going to be on here. Maybe I want to make a collar for this jacket too, so I'm just drawing that on. So use your garment like a notebook, which is sort of what I said at the beginning, where I said you don't need to create all those design features unless you're testing the sewing process. You can actually just draw them on. So say if I was creating this kind of collar like this here, I could just draw this on to check it first, and then maybe I add it afterwards to check that the pattern I've created is right, if you draft your own patterns. But you can just simply draw things on to check them as well. And the materials I love to use to draw things on are either a water erasable pen, but where I live here in Bali, then it's pretty humid. So if I'm going to do something that I want to last a long time, I can't use this. I have to use something different because it simply just fades. But if I'm doing something and I just need it to be on there for half an hour or maybe a maximum a day, then I will use this water erasable pen. I love it. I'll link these things below anyway, so you can get them. Otherwise, if I'm doing a toile that I know that I'm creating a one-off piece, then I will just use a normal pen, and you can use different colors if you are making different adjustments. So if you draw in a pocket and you think, oh no, that's wrong, just use a different color, and then you'll know, okay, the pink one, that was my final design. I want to follow the pink line. So use different colors, or you can use a pencil or a chalk as well. So you have many different options. Just think how many times you're going to be using your toile. If you're going to be using it multiple times, you want something you can remove. If it's a very one-off piece, you can just use a normal pen or a normal pencil that can't really be erased off your toiles. And that actually leads me into my next tip, which is when you are doing adjustments, do them in different color threads. So when you're first sewing up your toile for the first time, you could do it in a normal, actually I've got this sampled over here, which is pretty handy. So when I did my first sewing of this toile, I did it all in cream thread, so you probably can't really see it. But then when I did any adjustments, I changed to, I think it's like a dark green thread. So I changed the shaping on the bodice here. So it's gone from here to here. And I know this line here, this is my new line. This is the one I want to be focusing on. So then it's easy for me to remember later on, that's the one I want to use to change my pattern. So any adjustments you make, no matter whether they're design or fitting, use a different color each time you're doing a new iteration. Speaking of iterations, when is it necessary for us to create another toile? So the only time I will create another toile is if I can't test what I'm trying to test properly. Like if I'm bodging it and I can't really test the new fit of what I'm doing because I've run out of fabric, or maybe just because I've done too many alterations and I can't actually physically change it, then I will do another toile. If I'm not happy with the sewing process, I will do another toile. If I'm not happy with the overall silhouette and I can't change the garment enough that I've already got because I don't have enough fabric or like the reasons I already said, then I will do another toile. So it's very simple. If you can't test what you want to test on that original toile, make another toile. If you've tested everything and you can easily adjust it, then you can use that same toile. You don't need to make another toile. So the aim is you want to be happy with the design, the fit, and the sewing process before you make your final piece. My last and final tip is only relevant for those of you who either draft your own sewing patterns or are going to draft your own sewing patterns. So when you draft your own sewing patterns, what I always teach my students is to create half-scale patterns first before creating full-scale patterns of their garments. And this is something I do myself as well. I even created a half-scale version of these trousers before I created them so that I could test the drafting process, and most importantly, so I could create a half-scale toile and test out the look of these pair of trousers as well. So that gets me onto my question and my tip here, which is, when do you want to create a half-scale toile, and when do you want to just skip that and go to a full-scale toile? So I recommend creating a half-scale toile, and just to be clear, if you are new around this kind of world, half-scale patterns and half-scale toiles are literally half the size of your full-scale patterns, full-scale toiles. They're literally there to help us save time, save materials, and this gets me onto my point as to why you want to create a toile of them. Test the look of your design. You can't test the fit with them. You can test the sewing process with them, but honestly, when it comes to small intricate design details like a collar, I don't really test the sewing process properly with them because it's pretty fiddly. The same with putting armholes in, they're pretty fiddly, so you're not really testing the sewing process. The purpose of half-scale toiles is to test the design. So when I was creating this pair of trousers here, then I created a half-scale toile that you can see on the screen now of these trousers to test the design. And this is what I recommend to my students inside my in-depth drafting course, Design Confidence. I always recommend to them, if you want to see how this pattern is going to look, just create it in half scale. And I always get them drafting in half scale to start with as well, so they are saving material, saving time, and also it helps with the amount of space we have as well. So only create those half scale toiles if you want to see if the design is how you have in your mind. But if you're creating a fairly classic garment, or you know that it's going to turn out how you want because you've been doing it a while and you can imagine it really well, then you can skip to the full scale toile only, and you don't need to bother with that half scale toile. That is it from me today. If you liked this video, then please hit subscribe, and if you want to discover more about my world, you can head over to my website, thesewingretreat.co.uk, where you'll find links to everywhere, everything, blogs, more YouTubes, my Instagram, my courses, and you can discover more about my world, where I show you how to draft your dream clothes, design your dream clothes, and fit your dream clothes as well.